My name is Bernt Julius Muus, and I go by BJ. Then I'm named after my great-grandfather, who was a pioneer pastor down in Goodhue County in Minnesota, and he was the founder of St. Olaf College, and started in his parsonage at Kenyon. That's where he started a school for young Norwegian boys and girls who needed a place to begin. And then that kind of was moved into the town of Northfield, where others have heard about it. And gradually, a group in Northfield bought some acreage just outside of Northfield that was part of which was a big hill called Manitou Heights. And that's where they started a college, St. Olaf College. So the school town was high on Manitou Heights. But anyway, where did you want me to go now?
I just was wondering, what year were you born?
Oh, okay. I was born in 1927, October 6th, 1927. I was born in Fargo, North Dakota. And my dad at that time was a pastor, had congregations south of Fargo in small towns, 3 small congregations. So that when I was born, we had to go up to Fargo to have that done. So that's where I was born, and my family earlier on, after my father was with those 3 small congregations, one of which was Comstock, moved to St. James, Minnesota, and that's where I started my grade school, and I went to grade school there through grade 1 up through grade 4. And then my dad was called to be a pastor up at Fergus Falls, Minnesota. So I started the 5th grade in Fergus Falls, 5th and 6th grades, and then on up into junior high and into high school, my freshman and sophomore years. And then my dad during World War I was in the Navy. Toward the end of World War I, it wasn't any battlefields or anything like that. But he was in the Navy at the end of the war, and so he had that experience. And during World War II, he put in his name to our Lutheran church to maybe be a host and a pastor for a servicemen's center out in Spokane, Washington. And so I finished my junior and senior years out in Spokane. And after I graduated there, that's when I went to St. Olaf. My mom and dad were still in Spokane for a little longer, but they eventually then came back to Fergus Falls. But anyway, when I went to college, went to St. Olaf College, and during the 4 years that I was there, I sang in the choir under Olaf Christensen, and I graduated in 1949 the choral music at St. Olaf was begun by F. Milius Christensen, who came over from Norway, and he was the one that developed the choir at St. Olaf, which through the years that he was there and up to the time that he turned it over to his son Olaf, who I sang under, the St. Olaf choir had built a reputation of being perhaps one of the finest choirs, a cappella choirs in our country. And it was my privilege to sing under Olaf Christensen. And at the time that I attended St. Olaf, I was planning to be a pastor like my dad. So I planned to go on to the seminary after graduation, seminary in St. Paul. So that when I graduated, I did go to the seminary in St. Paul. And during the time that I was there, one of the things that they wanted the students who were there, as part of their education and training, was to be involved in some kind of congregational work in a church, particularly, if possible, in the Twin Cities area. And one of the places that, of course, being a freshman, first semester, why we were all given opportunities to do that. One of the places that was listed at that time was Central Lutheran Church, which is downtown Minneapolis. And that is perhaps, at that time, was the largest congregation in the Lutheran Church, the Norwegian Lutheran Church at that time. So seeing that, and I majored in music at St. Olaf, but I did not take any classes in educational classes. I took music classes, which was my major, because I liked music. And during high school, I had played in orchestras because I had played the violin when I was growing up in St. James, and moved to Fergus Falls. They had an orchestra in the high school at that time, and so I got involved in that as a sophomore. And the fellow who was the main music teacher at Fergus Falls at that time was a man by the name of Luther Onerheim, who was also a graduate of St. Olaf with a major in music. And he was the director of the orchestra, the band, and the choir at Fergus Falls, and had very excellent groups. So I was fortunate to be able to, up through my freshman and sophomore year at Fergus, to be a part of that orchestra, playing the violin. And also I played, learned from Luther Onerheim to play the baritone. So I got into the band. So it was, got into some instrumental work. And out in Spokane, when my dad was out there as in that service center pastor, I sang in the choir at Lewis and Clark High School, which was one of the bigger schools in Spokane. And we had a very fine choir at Lewis and Clark, very fine director. So I sang with the choir for 2 years, and also played baritone in the band part of that time too. So was able to kind of continue my interest in choral work. So when I got a chance to, after starting at seminary, and a chance to direct at a young people's choir, high school age choir at Central Lutheran Church, I jumped at the chance. I answered that opportunity and was fortunate to receive the chance to do it. After working with those kids that way and being involved with them in activities like the square dance, I thought, boy, I'm in the wrong place. Because I had been attending classes at the seminary too. And there had been some interesting things, but more and more I just felt that I was in the wrong place. I dropped out of the seminary and I enrolled in McPhail College of Music, which is downtown Minneapolis, which has a program which involves classes in music education, and they had their own choir and orchestra at the college. So for the second semester, while I was still working with the kids at Central Lutheran Hall, now this made 2 semesters that I had a chance to work with them, or that whole year. And but while I was at McPhail, going to school during the day, well, then I had my work with the high school age kids in the evenings. And so we continued singing Sunday mornings and having our square dances and so forth. So that, after finishing my work at McPhail, which involved classes in both grade school education classes and high school classes, and I had a chance to follow through each week of these classes with excellent person who was involved both with grade school and high school in the Minneapolis school systems, where the main teaching of music was done by the classroom teacher and not by a music teacher. It was done by a classroom teacher. And they had a program set up so that at each grade level, the classroom teacher had to be involved with a class scheduling that they would attend, where they would find out how to go about taking care of the materials and involving the students at that grade level. And I thought, man alive, that's fantastic. So by the time these kids were in their grade school system, in the Minneapolis school system, up through the 6th grade and then on into the 7th and 8th grades, they knew how to read music. They were taught solfeggio. They knew the do-re-mis. And so I had a chance to go with this teacher and see what had been accomplished in classrooms through that kind of a program in the Twin Cities. So I had sent my application after finishing at McPhail. I had sent my application in to St. Olaf Placement Bureau so that I could be involved, or they could be involved in well, they received information from schools where they were looking for music teachers and other teachers. But I had a chance to find out through the Placement Bureau. I had a chance to visit a couple of places and decided on the opportunity at the high school and junior high school in Chisholm, Minnesota, up on the Iron Range. And up in Chisholm, they had a choir, a mixed choir, but I found out going later on that there had been no teachers that had stayed more than 1 or 2 years. And but one of the reasons I found out was that they had done nothing but popular music. And my background was not going to be in popular music. And so we started off our first, I should tell you too that when I went to Chisholm, they had no really choir room. But where their choir room was in a classroom in the junior high building, where in the back end of the room, behind the seats and desks, there were risers set up so that the rehearsals were done standing. There was a piano and the risers. That was the equipment. So that's what we started with. And some of them, we started off right away with Bach chorales. And we moved into these things and into similar types of things. And I had a few of the kids, they were a little antsy and kind of weren't involved too much, but we just stayed with that. Chorales, getting into some other things, sacred music, so that in Chisholm, I should say in Chisholm, they had an orchestra, which was the primary musical group, and they were under the direction of an Italian musician who had come from Italy. He had no education in our system, college systems here, but he had been hired to come to Chisholm because he was a very fine orchestra teacher. And he had built through about 25 years an orchestra that I have never heard another one that would compare. He worked with kids. Every kid in his orchestra came for lessons during the school day, at different times, so that every one of those kids involved with this teacher on a personal basis, taken out of some class for a time of music with that teacher. And that's how he built an orchestra. And he also had a small band, but they played primarily at football games, that sort of thing. So we went along in the choir. I didn't, right away I got into using vocal warm-ups, and so that and we got into some use of syllables, and fortunately I had a few of the kids that were in the orchestra. I had a very fine violinist from the orchestra that was one of our top soprano people. And I had another girl that was very fine pianist. So when I wanted to have the piano used, why, I had somebody to do that. And we had along the line, we certainly did have times when we needed to use it, particularly at the beginnings. But toward Christmas time, we had gotten along far enough so that we got into Christmas music. So we got into some carols, but also some good composed Christmas music. And together with Mr. Regis and the orchestra, the two of us worked out a Christmas program, which they had never had in the high school or in Chisholm. So we had a Christmas program with the orchestra and the choir. Orchestra in the pit in a very nice auditorium in the junior high building with plush seats. And, I mean, it was a beautiful, beautiful auditorium. But there was a place for the orchestra in the pit, and then we were on the stage back of them. And we had a program which involved some nice, wonderful orchestra music and some wonderful choral music on our Christmas program. In the second semester, we started again into some sacred music and worked through different things. We got into motets of like Jesu Priceless Treasure motet of Bach and other really fine choral music. And also some good contemporary writing of things that weren't sacred, but just good, solid choral compositions. And we got to the place where toward Easter time, or prior to that, where we got into some Easter sacred music and Easter carols. And together with the orchestra, they carried, again in the pit and we on the stage, did an Easter program, which had never been done in Chisholm. So we had a Christmas program, we had an Easter program, and then what do we do? Well, the orchestra continues with their really fine, so we got into some good folk music, some good spirituals that were appropriate, and some of the contemporary music. And we got into some things that we found out that we could sing at graduation. So we got into three things that we could sing then. And so we did have a program of that kind of thing later in the spring. So we had started Christmas, Easter, and then toward the spring concerts. At the spring concert, we did that more on our own. Then in the second year, we followed pretty much the same thing. We, in the choir, we started off with sacred choral music, and we worked toward Christmas, where we, again, put on a concert with the orchestra. We did the same thing, choir on stage, did the same thing toward Easter, but then at the spring concert again, we did more of our own things, folk music, spirituals, but we also did at our spring concert that year some really fine sacred things that the choir had gotten into, even into some double choir things that they had gradually been able to do. And I mean, the progress that choir made between the first and into the second year was just boggling. And the choir was catching it. So that in the second year we of course had tryouts for the choir, but the choir was building, and we were up into like 60, 65 members, still on our stands in the back of the junior high music room, rehearsing, standing up. But we had gotten into singing by the end of that year. For in the spring, we had gotten into this thing by Randall Thompson called The Peaceable Kingdom, which involves a lot of double choir work and several portions to it. And they did this in concert. And this is after 2 years. And as I say, we did a couple of sacred things at the spring concert. Well, our superintendent, after our spring concert, came up I was up in the choir room in the junior high, just kind of pulling things together. And the superintendent came up to the choir room, and he looked a little bit concerned, and he said, "You know, after that first sacred music, that would have been enough." I thought, uh-oh. And I really didn't comment too much about him because he went on talking about a couple of things. And I said, well, we'd made just tremendous progress. And I had looked forward to coming back and doing more. But I decided that this was not going over very well with the administration. So I put my name in at the St. Olaf at the St. Olaf Placement Bureau after that second year, and after that business with the superintendent. And so I was, the rest of the year, I was given a few openings by the Placement Bureau, a couple of high schools, and I had an opening at Appleton, so I went and talked with their superintendent, and he was wanting somebody to come and carry on, which was a fairly good program. Wasn't a real large school, but it was a nice sized school. But he also wanted me to teach an English class and drive one of the school buses. And I thought, if I'm supposed to be building a choir program, this is going to take more than having to prepare English classes and driving school buses. So I had another chance up at a place called Grafton up in North Dakota, up near Grand Forks. And they had an excellent band. And their band, at the time that I visited the superintendent, was out. They had been invited to go out to California to be part of a parade because they were an excellent band. They had a good director, and So this band had been out there and had come back from that kind of an experience. And, well, the superintendent showed me what, or told me kind of what he wanted. And it didn't sound very encouraging. He wanted to say that he had a choir in the program, but it wasn't a very encouraging thing. So I dropped that. And so then I thought, well, after having a couple other opportunities that didn't really seem to, I didn't even visit some of them. I decided, well, I think I'm just going to go back to Chisholm and continue what we started, and no matter what. But I also had my put my place into St. Olaf, into the Placement Bureau. Well, I had, like I say, I decided to go back to Chisholm. Well, the summer after that second year, my wife came from a family in Chicago where she had sung in an excellent choir in a high school called the Chicago Christian High School. Had an excellent director that was the son of a father who was an excellent director. So she had been in that choir, and so she came from Chicago. And during that summer, after that second year, during that summer, her folks, her dad had retired from, he had been connected with the Packard Auto Company downtown Chicago. He had been in charge of their service department. And they lived out on 95th or out around 94th Street. So he had a drive from 94th Street through traffic down to Midtown and back every day. And he'd been with them for quite a number of years. And so he and his wife he was retiring, and his wife had purchased a piece of land up in southwestern Michigan, where they used to go up on their vacations. They used to go up to a camp, a Christian camp, sort of like a Bible camp that was on Lake Michigan, and not too far from where this plot of land was that they had purchased. Their land was about a mile from the lake, by the sand dunes of Lake Michigan, which is a popular spot on the lake. And this other camp was actually on the lake. It's a sand dune. So her folks had purchased this property, and there was a little cabin on that property where when they found out that could be used, it was a small cabin, but no electricity, no plumbing. There was an outside pump. So that's was a part of the property, but they had decided to build a home on that property and retire sell the place in Chicago eventually, their home, and retire up there. Well, they had wanted, they had heard about that I had had I had become interested in their daughter. And so they had found out that I had done some carpentry, so forth. So they mentioned that they would like to have a home built there. And so I was asked if I would maybe draw a diagram of possibilities that could be done for them in a home, maybe a 2-bedroom home, and with the dining and living room area and a little screen porch and a attached garage and a basement. So I sent them a design which they liked. They really liked it. So that summer, prior to my coming up with her dad to work on that project, do the carpentry, they had a local man in that area in Michigan put in a cement block basement with foundation. So we had a chance, his dad and I, to start lumberyard not too far away. So we had a chance to start from the basement up, start constructing a home for them. And along about, and we worked at this every day, and my wife, Alice, and I, we were married by that time. She and I stayed in that cabin, and her mom and dad stayed in that little cabin. And no electricity, no plumbing. But we had a wonderful time together. And one day, about the 3rd of July that summer, her dad and I had done quite a bit of framing in that month, and it was really coming along. But we were, on the 3rd of July, we were sitting eating dinner in that little cabin. And a neighbor, farmer next door, came over and he said, "Is there anybody here by the name of Muus?" I said, "Yeah, that's my name, my family name." She said, "Well, I have a telephone call for you from Ottawa, Illinois." In Ottawa, Illinois, I'd never heard of the place. And somebody would like to talk with you. I would like to have you call back. Well, it left his number. So we didn't have a phone there at the little cabin. So I went next door to the phone at this farmer's place, and he got in touch with the number he'd been given in Ottawa. And it was a superintendent of schools, Macrae Shannon. I have kind of narrowed it down a little bit but I would like to, if you would you care to come down and really, so we can talk about it? And I can really tell you what I like to do. And I said, well, I kind of planned to go back up to Chisholm, but she said, well, I would really like to talk with you. And I said, okay, well, we'll come down. So on July 4th, the next day, Alice and I traveled from southwest Michigan back down to Ottawa, which must have been a 3-4 hour drive. And were met by McRae Shannon, and he had arranged for us to have a dinner with him out at Starved Rock Lodge. You know about Starved Rock.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took us out there, drove us in his car out there, and so we had a nice meal, and during the meal he was talking to us and explained to us, you know, what he wanted to do, because he said, we do not have a choir program here. We have an excellent band program, but he said, I would like to have a choir program in the school. And he said, I would be willing to do whatever we need to do to get something going. And so he talked about it and told us, and he said, well, he said, you think about it. And I said, yeah, we'll think about it. And you let me know. And so when we parted that day, we drove back to Michigan all the way, and all on the way back we thought, oh man, alive. You know, he sounds like he really wants to do something. I mean, we hadn't met anybody like that before. And so the next day we called Chisholm and told him that we were not going to be coming back in the fall, and we were quitting the teaching job there. And we called Mr. Shannon and told him that, yes, we would like to take that job. So
that was the beginning of your
that
starting
was
out.
the beginning. Decided to move to Ottawa, and
You had a couple kids too.
yeah, couple trips.
Couple kids.
Oh,
You had a
You had a
couple
couple
kids.
kids.
yeah, we had a
Anyway.
couple kids by
Yeah.
then too. So we moved from Grand Marais to Ottawa, and we rented a home, or just down the east from the school, just a little bit. I don't know if you know, do you know where a fellow by the name of Bohannon?
Yes.
Okay. Just back of him, there was a fellow who was a carpenter who had built a sort of an apartment house, 2 stories. Okay, this carpenter was living in the upper story, but we found out that we could rent that lower story. So just about a block away from the school, we had found an apartment that was nice and close. And so that's when we got started in our program at Ottawa. And of course we had some conferences with Mr. Shannon in the meantime, and he told us that he would like to, you know, he told me what they had. He told me about John Hall and what he had done. He did that, and that's all he told me, that through the extras, through every so often, Mr. Hoff had made this musical and had that kind of a little bit of a music background. But he did not tell me about any scheduled there was nothing in the regular school schedule that he even talked about
As far as vocal music was
as
concerned.
far as vocal music was concerned. But he wanted to do that, and he wanted the band was in the schedule. Okay, so the first semester, they had a group of kids that word got out that if they were interested in choir, and we had a group of about 40 or 45 that would be willing to come after school and rehearse every day after school, that whole first semester. And then in the second semester, it would be put in the schedule. So that's what we did. We had this whole group of 40. Mr. Shannon had some bleachers, some standing bleachers put in the back of the classroom, which was already scheduled in there, which was offered to all of the students, and they did have a class scheduled. And it was just sort of a general music class. It wasn't a class toward the vocal music program. I had a chance to just do some things that were going to have to be done to get that program into the second semester. And but as far as the actual things in school that I had to do, it was limited schedule primarily to that class and the study hall. And during that time, so we were scheduled in this program second semester. And we still had those risers in the back in that classroom. I did not have that class the second semester, but I was able to have the choir more like work with ensembles and do that sort of thing during the daytime. During the daytime, and during that first year, during the time that this was happening, the band at that time was rehearsing in the Manual Arts building.
Yes.
Up on third floor in what used to be a classroom. But that had been cleared away enough so that the band could
set up their
rehearse and use that. Okay. In addition, they were redoing that whole wing, street, that wing that faced the street.
The Manual Arts.
The Manual Arts building. They were redoing it into a music department, which would involve a band room and a choir room. And between the two rooms, two offices. And the two offices had windows between them. And so we could converse back and forth. So they had their band room, and we had our choir room, and we both had windows facing the street.
Mm-hmm.
And with the offices between. And out in the hallway, or what used to be the hallway, they had constructed some practice rooms, which they had none of before, either band or choir. But we must have had a half a dozen practice rooms along the hall there. And yet these stairs, as I remember, at the end of the hall going down between the floors, I think they were still usable.
Yes.
So we had the two rehearsal rooms, we had the offices, we had the practice rooms, and so our program we were able to use those facilities and both band and choir, and follow through on programs, develop ensembles and so forth. I should say too, before continuing on that, during that first year, even though we were practicing after school, we still, together with the band, put on a Christmas program. And again, it was band, choir on the stage, and behind the choir, up on another stage, which had been put on stilts and stuff, were living pictures, which were scenes from different scenes of the Christmas story. And these programs in Ottawa were done usually the Sunday afternoon before Christmas,
season, yeah.
and Sunday afternoon before Easter.
Well, usually Palm Sunday, yeah.
Yeah, Palm Sunday
Right.
at Easter. So,
Didn't they have a tableau club? Didn't they have a tableau club that they had different clubs at Ottawa? And I think those that ended up working
with
for the
that.
living pictures, they
That
had
could
an
be.
actual club.
Yeah. That could be, because I had nothing to do with it. I just turned it over to them.
Wasn't that a tradition that you also had at St. Olaf? Didn't they have living pictures?
At St. Olaf they had that.
Yeah.
So that you kind of got the idea
I
from
got
what
it
you
from
had
St. Olaf.
experienced at St. Olaf,
Yeah.
took it to Chisholm, and then took it to Ottawa.
Yeah.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good.
And of course at St. Olaf they had the orchestra, and they had all of their choirs. It was a huge choir, and it was done in the girls' gym, which had they had bleachers and stuff, and the choir was on big bleachers, and up above was a racing track.
Huh.
And on that racing track, there were some bleachers, but on the racing track is where they put these pictures in back of the choir. And it was people look forward to those. During this next few years, the school had grown in such a way, student-wise, that the school had decided to add on. So what they did was you had the main building here, and you had the manual arts building and the gym here. And what they did was to build toward the football field a big building across the two, which became the McRae-Shannon building.
Right.
With floors, each classrooms on each floor. And so in that new building was also a new band room in there, and a new choir room with offices for the choir, office for the band.
Storage areas and practice rooms.
Practice rooms, and also there was a room for choir robes, that sort of thing, and we had another small classroom for music appreciation.
Right.
Or later on, when after I really turned it over to Paul, the choral work, we had a classroom that was used for a string program.
Right.
And for things like that, because they wanted at that time, there was enough orchestra work. They had the Illinois Valley Symphony,
Right.
which was Ottawa and LaSalle, Peru. I had a chance to work with that group for a year. But I also then had a chance to work in Ottawa High School with the string program, which started small, but we did take part in a couple of public performances during the times that I was working with them. Mr. Shannon was still living. And as I say, our first tour was out to the Black Hills. And to tell you just a little bit about Mr. Shannon, he was a wonderful, he was like a chaperone on that tour. And there were times when the choir maybe did some things at a couple of our stops that he didn't really like too much. But anyway, he went along with it. And then there was a time on one of our return stops, we were singing asked to sing at a small church in southern Minnesota, like around Spring Valley or one of the small towns. But anyway, the church sponsored us. A lot of times when we sang in churches, the churches did sponsor us, and the students stayed in homes. And sometimes the homes would feed them, sometimes the Ladies' Aid would feed them. But anyway, we were in this small church, and they had their supper in the church. And after supper, the kids went outside, nice evening, and they were just kind of having fun together. I don't know if they had a football or whatever, or kicking soccer. But anyway, pretty soon there was a motorcyclist in town who was, just taking a run through town and enjoying himself. Well, he stopped and asked the students who they were, what are they doing? And so they told him, and pretty soon he had asked some of the kids if they'd like a ride with him. So some of them took turns and did their little way. Well, wouldn't you know what? Pretty soon I looked around there, and who was getting on the motorcycle in back of this guy was Mr. Shannon. And he had a ride out and back, and he was all pumped up, It was just fantastic. And the choir was just cheering,
I'm sure they
yeah, so that's the kind of a guy he was.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things where he put his heart into the program. And he was that way. I could not have worked under a more solid, within person. We got to know each other very well. We spent time within each other's homes, and talking about things and going over things sometimes. And we knew each other's family, and he said one of the groups that I worked with, one of the ensembles so much during my years, was a madrigal group. And this was a group of about 8 to 10 or 11, 12 maybe, kids, depending on who they were or what we needed. And we rehearsed sometimes after school, sometimes if often they rehearsed in my home. And so they felt comfortable there and nice. And lots of time my wife would have maybe some good lemonade or something, and they really enjoyed doing that. We also had a chapel choir, which was extracurricular, but we had invitations from time to time in some of the small churches around the Ottawa area for a program. And so we had a group that kind of came together. It was just a voluntary group. But we did sing some programs as a chapel choir, usually on a Sunday night or something like that. We got involved in it pretty much from the beginning, particularly when we were able to start working with ensembles and so forth.
Yes.
And the band had ensembles and participated also. And so when we really got to the place where we started taking part, it was pretty early on, but we did it for, must have been about, I don't know, 12 years, something like that. But then and during that time, as one of the newspapers that's in that box, you'll see the pictures of that were in the paper before going to state contest to try to carry on the tradition of Ottawa High School as one of the top contenders.
Yeah.
Okay, so we did that for quite a few years. But then, after having that kind of thing and kids involved, I decided to kind of go little different route and get in maybe some guest conductors to work with the choir for a couple 3 days or something. And also we were involved in hosting one or two college choirs. I think the St. Olaf Choir on one visit was hosted, and I wanted to following through on the summer choir program. The band was talking about trips and so forth, and so because we were involved in pretty much the same types of programs, summer program, it was voluntarily, but they didn't have to come, but they did. And so we got involved in the summer program, and as a result of that summer program, each time, every other year, we had a group of 40, primarily on 40 to 45, one busload.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the kids that were going on that trip had to really become more involved than once a week. We got into tours, and because I know what I got out of a tour on a college choir trip, and I knew that these kids would get something special out of doing those kinds of things, and it would involve not only music but attitudes and doing the right thing.
Right. Character.
And being careful in how your conduct is, and being thankful when you're hosted in homes and given good suppers and
right.
And that sort of thing.
It was more than just the music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we ended up with, and And as Paul said, we did have times when we were invited to, like one of the programs, and you'll find it in that, on that particular year, I forget when it was, but you'll find it in the box. We were invited one year to sing at the Illinois Music Educators Convention.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a program at that convention. And a cappella. And they had a good response on that. And there were times we sang up in Chicago. We generally up there we did it with a little smaller group. I don't know whether we used maybe a magical group, but we sang for the Sunday Evening Club, which has a program every Sunday in Chicago.
In Orchestra Hall.
In Orchestra Hall. So things like this, we were invited to sing at other high schools. We were invited to sing at conferences, music conferences, and we attended lots of conferences as participants. I can't say that I had anything that would be of a kind that didn't really go as I wanted it to go. I think things developed along lines that were more encouraging, and occasionally I would, and this isn't a criticism of the kids, it's a criticism of maybe sometimes others that there were a few that didn't, I guess, like the idea that we were singing on Palm Sunday and doing things like that. Just top notch. I mean, we had so many wonderful things that happened there that I mean, this and that, even as the kids were growing up and living in the community for 8 years. And, I mean, I have nothing but, I would go back there and live anytime. Even, you know, having, for instance, when I was told that we could come to Ottawa, that you were being given the chance to do this, why, we moved down there, and the first couple of weeks down there, we ran into a time when temperature was about 90 degrees or more, and the humidity was around 95. And I thought, oh man. But you know, even things like that, when we built our home there, we did, you know, I talked about this carpenter that lived in the upper story of that apartment building that we first lived in. He and I built our regular home in Ottawa, up on the northwest edge of town. And we were able to, when we finished it, we completed, we were able to put in air conditioning. Well, we didn't have air conditioning in our apartment at Chisholm, and we didn't have it very much down in Ottawa for a little bit either. But, you know, just as far as the people are concerned, I had a girl in the choir who was the daughter of Jewish parents. She sang with us for 4 years. She sang in all of our concerts, Christmas, Easter concerts. Mm-hmm. She sang about Christ's resurrection and his death on the cross. And at the end of her graduation, after singing with us for 4 years, she came up into the choir room with a little package. And she said, "Oh, Mr. Muus," she said, "my folks just wanted to leave this with you." And her folks had purchased a tape player, which we didn't have in our choir room at that time, and which we were able to use quite a bit after her graduation. But she said, "My folks just want to thank you."
That's quite a compliment.
This was one of the things that I remember when we were still going to contests. We were at a contest in Peoria or someplace. And, we had to sing our numbers, and then we had to sight read. And so doing what we did in our music theory classes and in those preparation times, they had become pretty decent in sight reading.
Right.
And so this, one of the final years, we were connected with the state contest. We had our sight reading. And of course we got into there, and we did the sight read the piece on. We did a lot of sight reading on like Lou or Ya or whatever. But anyway, we got through the piece, and we got kind of off things a little bit, but the choir had learned to don't stop when you're off. Just listen and pick it up. Look where the notes are. And we finished it in tune, in rhythm. And later on, we were told by one of the sight reading judge that we were the first choir, we were the only choir that day that they'd heard that was able to finish the piece. And it was what the kids had done.
Yeah.
What they'd worked, what they'd accepted.
Right.
As, we're not here just to sing, we're here to proclaim and to do something. I was, in retirement, and it was hard to go because there were so many people that we felt so close to. Like John Kinnison and Ray McKeever and just so many. And when the students and I should tell. Can I regress?
Sure.
Again? The choir kids. They got so that we got to be enjoying things. And one of the things we did was at Christmas time, we learned sometimes some songs in the language that they were written. Well, my background is in Norway, Norwegian. And so I taught the choir this Norwegian Carol, I am so glad each Christmas Eve, which is Ye er så glad er julekväll. And we sang it in Norwegian. And there was another time when I remember we sang a piece, I think in some Spanish. Well, I wasn't really, but we did some things in German. In fact, we did one thing that was one of our key pieces on one of our choir trips. I think the one down to California, we did the whole piece in German. And I had, when I was teaching at the school there, I mentioned before that one of the ladies that was involved with the living pictures was a German teacher. So one semester, I attended her class during my free hour, her German class, so that I could learn how to pronounce German, what the inflections and stuff were, and to learn some of the language, because I wanted to do couple of these German pieces that were so beautiful. And we did do one in German on this California trip. But, just being able to interest the kids in doing something like that.
Something challenging, yeah.
Yeah. When I retired, I wanted to come up here and build a home, because when I was growing up, one of the places that I remember very vividly and very clearly was our family trips. My dad, mom, and brother and I came up to Grand Marais. We had more vacations up here than all of the rest of them put together. When we first came up here, I was about this tall, and my brother was about that tall. I'm 2 years older. You're 9 months, 14 days older. But anyway, we came up here and we tented. My dad, mom had a tent, and we used that for vacations. If we were going out to the Black Hills, we did. Sometimes we tented. And so when we came up here to Grand Marais, North Shore, we tented down in the park, right on the bay. And we put up our tent maybe 10 yards from the lake, from the beach, so that my brother and I could get down there and skip rocks. Okay, so we came up and spent a number of years in our tent down there, and then pretty soon we got a cabin. There's a little community out here along the lake called Croftville. And out there are some resorts that have they're fishermen in the first place, but these fishermen had sometimes cabins. And a number of years, or some years, we rented a cabin out in Croftville at a fisherman's place. And lots of times, this fisherman, he'd go out to his nets, of course, every day. Lots of times he had nets out by what we call 5 Mile Rock, which is a rock island 5 miles east. And so he'd let my brother and I, or I remember myself, going with him out to those nets, watching him pull up the nets across the bow of his boat and taking out the herring, or going out to the trout nets out by the island and taking out the trout. And so we spent some vacations there, and that, to me, I look forward to going out with these fishermen. Well, a couple of years, he was filled up. So then my folks knew he had a brother that had a couple cabins right next door. So for a couple of years then, we had cabins with the brother, who was also a fisherman. But he didn't have nets way out like that, but he had them right in front of his fish house. So I'd go out with him, and he didn't even have an outboard motor. He rode all the time, forward. Not much this way, but forward, standing up. And he had a son that worked with him. And then they'd fish into their boathouse there, and I'd watch them cleaning the fish and so forth. Well, this became a place that we always loved. And eventually my dad and mom bought a piece of land on Lake Superior about 12, 15 miles up the shore from here, just beyond Nanabadoo Lodge and not quite up to Hovland. And we built, my dad and I, my dad had been in contact with a logger up in Hovland who sawed all the logs and skinned them from the bark and cut the logs into length and then brought them to the site. And my dad had the foundation parts of rock pyramids had already been built. So we put in and he had a floor put in. And again, I don't remember if I drew the plan or if he did, or anyway. So my dad and I built a log cabin there. And we did it by sawing and by sledgehammers. And on the side of each log, we put the logs vertically instead of horizontally. And because we didn't really know how to, all the carving that needed to be done. So we did it vertically, and so each log came with the side sawed flat, which this lumberjack did in his place in Hovland. So we were able to, with a skill saw, cut a groove along each side in which we had a rope that was about this big around. It's called oakum, that was made up of fibers. And in this oakum, it was treated with creosote. So it was about this big around, and if you squeezed it, you'd squeeze out the creosote. But we put it in this long trench between the logs so that when we hammered them together with a sledgehammer with nails about this long, about 1 foot nails. I mean, we needed a sledgehammer. And that's the way we built our log cabin. And of course, leaving space for windows. And we got that summer all 4 walls in. We got logs. It has a flat roof, highest toward the lake, but gradually sloping to the back. And we had logs that we put up there for rafters, which were about this far apart, with logs like about this. And we had got those in place that first summer. So it was pretty much enclosed. They had to cover the openness with some plastic or something. But that's our start on a log cabin. And in another year or so, we had that log cabin with windows in it, and doors, and roof. So that's how we got started up here. And while we went here into Grand Marais and looked around for lots, and we saw from the hospital down here up this way, we saw only 1 or 2 houses. Well, the one next door here, the first one, was a fellow who had 40 acres here. And all he had on that was his home and a little cottage on it. But he had lots that he, on a map, had drawn off so that they could be sold. Well, he showed us this. We stopped and asked him about this area, and so he showed us a map, showed us the lots. And so my wife and I bought this one, and my son-in-law, his wife, bought that one. So we have 2 lots here, going from the road back another, 50 feet or so, and then each lot is about 100 feet. So we're kind of set back in this hill. And that's our home, and our sons built it, our sons. In my early years, when we were situated, my wife and I, in that apartment down near the school, across the street was a pastor of the Baptist church. And my wife grew up as a Baptist. And so I don't know whether she knew ahead of time or what, but anyway, we became good friends with this Baptist pastor here. So when we were living there and here, he was there, we found out that from him that the Baptist church was looking for a choir director because they really didn't have a choir. So I directed the choir at the Baptist church, and it was not a very profitable, let's put it that way, growth-wise thing, because our rehearsals we did before church in the morning, maybe an hour before church, or I forget, 45 minutes, about an hour. And so I would have to wait and see each Sunday who's going to be there.
Yeah.
And it started off with just, like a half a dozen members, and we finally got up to maybe 10 or 12, and this is over a period of 2 years. And then pretty soon it just kind of, it didn't work out.
Wasn't going anywhere. Yeah.
It didn't work out. So then, when we were living here, we attended the Lutheran church down on the south side, and Ray McKeever was directing the church choir there. He was a member there and directing the church choir. And so we went to that church, and we got acquainted with them, and then found out that there was a church on the west side here in EUB, in Evangelical United Brethren Church, that needed a choir director. So I heard about it, or got word about it somehow, and so I directed the choir there for a couple of years. Then pretty soon I was directing there, and then their service was at a different time than this one, so I sometimes direct there and go here and sing when Ray was directing. But anyway, pretty soon Ray felt that, this really wasn't his big thing, so he asked if I would care to direct. And I said, well, sure. I mean, if you feel like you want me to do that. So for a while I was directing 2 church choirs.
Wow.
This one at one service, and that one I'd finish here and then
leave,
and then I'd go over there and direct.
Yeah.
So we had some schedule worked out.
So not only were you involved in the high school, you were involved in the community too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, didn't you even early on do barber shoppers?
Oh yeah.
Oh, you did. You had a barbershop chorus also in Ottawa.
I had a barbershop chorus in Chisholm.
Oh, in Chisholm, okay.
Yeah, and we had a pretty decent men's group there that sang for different things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I also sang with 3 others of this group in a quartet
Yeah.
called the Midnight Blues. We got that name because we each had a midnight blue suit.
Yeah.
So the 4 of us,
Perfect.
but we did a lot of singing up in Chisholm on the Iron Range.
But you did some in Ottawa too.
And we,
Yeah.
in Ottawa, I directed the barbershop, was there for a while. That's my life.
Yeah.
It's what I live for. And I have enjoyed music ever since I was old enough to hold a violin this long, and then a little larger one, and then I enjoyed music all the way through. And